All right, so you should have something you have to click on your screens, everybody. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Jennifer Jefferson from the Wisconsin DNR, who's going to be sort of our main guide today.
All right, thanks, Eric. Yes, welcome. Good afternoon. I am Jen Jefferson, one of the presenters today. I am the Lakes and Rivers team leader for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, and I'm here today with Laura McFarland. We'll each do just a really brief introduction before we get started. I recently just started this current position at the end of June, and I work with our lakes, rivers, and AIS biologists around the state to implement the grant program, which works to protect, restore, and educate folks about Wisconsin's surface water ecosystems. I am physically located in the Milwaukee office. And Laura?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Laura McFarland. I am the Surface Water Grants Program Manager within the Bureau of Community Financial Assistance at the Department of Natural Resources. I work very closely with our team of environmental grant specialists who are located around the state to help administer the grant program, specifically the financial side of things. So we're here to help you navigate the regulations associated with receiving and managing state funds. We are often the first point of contact when it comes to questions about budgets, financial responsibility, forms, etc. I work out of the Rhinelander office up north.
And Sarah is not here today, but Sarah works really closely with both Laura and I within the program, and she is also the DNR contact for the Lake Monitoring and Protection Network, or the LMPN program. So some of you may have had some interactions with her as well in the past.
As well as the Clean Boats, Clean Waters program.
Oh yeah, and Clean Boats and Clean Waters. Yep, color. All right. So here is what we plan to cover in our hour together here. I'll start with a general overview of the program's design and purpose, and it is a rather large program. So second, we'll discuss several sub-programs and the projects they support. And then next, Laura will discuss steps to develop a project and provide some tips on writing a competitive grant application. And finally, we'll wrap up with a few additional resources for you to use after this presentation. So first, let's talk about the Surface Water Grant Program, kind of big picture. The Surface Water Grant Program is designed to help folks like yourselves access funds to support your work and the work of conservation partners and community groups. Each year, hundreds of lake groups, river organizations, and local units of government apply for funding to support a really wide range of protection and restoration projects. We hope to empower each of you to take advantage of these available funds and distribute this kind of information to customers or people you work with, and for you to be able to provide any bits of technical assistance on the grant application process if they need it. So the Surface Water Grant Program is competitive. We offer cost-sharing grants for both surface water protection and restoration that operate on a reimbursement basis. In 2023, we had nearly $6.5 million to commit to projects that protect and restore lakes, rivers, wetlands, and control aquatic invasive species. These dollars come from two primary sources of funding. The majority comes from the Water Resources account of the Conservation Fund, which is a gasoline excise tax calculated using the number of annual motorboat registrations. And another small amount comes from the Clean Water Act and is subject to additional reporting requirements in accordance with our agreement with EPA. So the legislature has tasked the department to use these funds to protect and improve the waters of our state and control AIS. The grant program is then divided further into three separate funding streams. Lakes and rivers funding supports projects that improve water quality, prevent pollution to these water bodies, protect and restore habitat, or purchase lands for the purpose of protecting lakes and rivers and their ecosystems. AIS, or Aquatic Invasive Species Funding, supports projects that prevent the spread of AIS and to assess and manage these populations. Here is a breakdown of the different grant funding streams: lakes, rivers, and AIS. We will talk a bit more about the specifics of each of these streams in the coming slides, but below each of these headings, you can see the biennial funding allocation for various subcategories. Last year and this coming year, we plan to divide the available funding, so kind of the non-bold text below the headings, dividing that funding up as you see here. So while we have over, or around $6.5 million annually, the pieces of the pie become smaller once you take into account the broad range of activities that are funded under this program. Also, and unfortunately, the surface water grant program is oversubscribed, meaning that we receive more applications than we have the ability to fund each year. And many of you who applied for funding in 2022 received a letter last February that began with the language you see here, that we received about $1 million, a little over $1 million more in requests than we have available. So there's definitely a lot of interest out here for this program. So next, let's look a little bit more in depth at the various funding subprograms and the kinds of projects supported. The Surface Water Grant Program is designed to support protection and restoration projects from start to finish. There are grants available that can support a local group wherever you are at in your journey through surface water stewardship. From organizing and educating a group about surface water, through collecting data to understand and study an ecosystem condition, to plan for management activities, design them, and then actually implement those practices. You'll see in the slides ahead, we simplify these types of activities into two overall project types. The first being education and planning. These projects help communities understand surface water conditions, determine goals, and develop strategic plans. The second types of projects are considered management projects. These projects support the on-the-ground activities and management actions that protect and improve water quality, habitat, and prevent and control AIS. So let's dig a little bit deeper. There are many different kinds of education and planning projects you might want to seek a grant for. Each of these grants have a focus on lakes, rivers, or aquatic invasive species. Education grants help you get the word out about water quality, invasive species, river management, or different lake uses. You can reach out to stakeholders and tell them how to get involved, hold workshops to convey information, or provide training. You can use education grants to develop an organization. You can use these funds to build the capacity of your organization to engage in collaborative management, or you might enhance your group's membership or human capital, or improve your ability to communicate, build relationships, and stay organized. We also have a robust planning program. It doesn't make a lot of sense to jump into an expensive project while not being quite sure what you have planned. So a good plan is good for your group. It will help you be productive, focused, and effective. A good plan can help make decisions, save time, keep a group on track, and provide strategic direction. You can use smaller scale planning grants for up to $10,000 to do pre-planning tasks. For example, you can conduct water body condition assessments, collect data on water quality, habitat, biological communities, or conduct social assessments. You can use these smaller grants to write a focused management plan to address a single focused management challenge. Examples of these include establishing plans for aeration or aquatic plant management. For more complex, large-scale challenges, you might want to take a more comprehensive planning approach, studying the watershed, the water body, the shoreline zone, and developing some long-term goals and objectives for protection and restoration. Large grants to support the writing of a comprehensive management plan are available for up to $25,000 per project. Especially complex plans may take a phased approach and are eligible for up to a total of $50,000 in planning and education dollars per year. So that other side of the program is the management group. These grants are funds we set aside for groups to take action and implement plans. The Healthy Lakes and Rivers program funds 5 simple best management practices to create shoreland habitat and reduce runoff. This program can be a really great first step if you have enthusiastic riparians or members looking to enhance or restore their lakefront property. If you're looking for a little bit larger of a project, surface water restoration grants can support work on lakes and rivers to install best management practices like stream bank stabilization, shoreline habitat restoration, riparian buffers, or restoring stream connectivity. These projects do not require a full management plan, but do require a project design that is consistent with practice standards established by NRCS. However, if you have a management plan with a recommendation approved by your local DNR biologist, we can provide implementation funds. By far, the most variable projects we support occur under this grant type. We have seen a large variety of projects come into the program under this category, but a few common things include alum treatments, watershed projects that reduce nutrient and sediment loads, work to retain and infiltrate stormwater, and many other types of projects. If you are going in for an implementation grant, you need to get approval for the project in advance. So be sure to submit a request to your local biologist to determine project eligibility by September 15th. You need a management plan to do this, which is a separate review and approval process. So remember, the DNR needs at least 60 days to review and approve the plan along with any recommendations you are exploring. And much more detail about that process and information can be found in the guidance document in Appendix B. So also, lake and river land acquisition grants can fund acquisitions or permanent conservation easements as well. A couple left kind of within the lakes and rivers group here. So county lake grants may be used by county governments and tribal governing bodies to develop regional protection plans. And this funding source can also be used to help implement actions recommended in those regional plans. And lastly, within this category, any eligible group can seek ordinance development grants to help them research, develop, and pass local protective ordinances. So within this broader management group, we also have the Aquatic Invasive Species, or the AIS grant program. AIS funds are used to prevent or control aquatic invasive species. The Clean Boats, Clean Waters, or CBCW for short, program is the flagship program and teaches lake users about AIS prevention. In addition, AIS prevention grants also provide supplemental dollars for high priority prevention work, allowing groups to go above and beyond the base CBCW program where necessary for AIS prevention. Next, the LMPN, or the Lake Protection and Monitoring Network, supports the work of counties, tribes, or their designated agents to carry out a list of core AIS and water quality services. Finally, AIS early detection and response grants focus on pioneering populations, providing assessment, planning, and control funding for projects to address new AIS populations carried out in cooperation with the department. The AIS control program also provides support for both small and large scale population management projects to suppress or control verified populations of aquatic invasive species guided by an approved recommendation under and an aquatic invasive species management plan. So that was a lot of information about the various grants, but the guidance document really kind of goes into these separate categories for a lot more information and background. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Laura, and I'm going to stop sharing, and Laura will reshare her screen.
Thanks, Jen. Just give me just a second to pull up the presentation here. All right. And you should see that slide again, grant writing. Is that correct, Jen?
Yep.
Yep.
Good.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Well, thanks for providing an introduction to the program, as well as kind of the greater detailed sub-programs and the types of projects we fund. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my screen so you guys can see me talking. Here we go. And going to reshare. I'm going to spend the remainder of our time here digging into, I guess, going into detail about the grant cycle timeline and discussing project development, including how you can submit a strong application to our program. As Jen mentioned, our program is oversubscribed. It is competitive, so it is absolutely necessary that you put your best foot forward and do your due diligence when composing your grant application, as well as when you're scoping your project. So I'm going to give you some tips and tricks that for the next 30 minutes about how you can do just that. You may look for the blue call out boxes throughout my presentation. These are grant writing tips in general. And then also I've added a yellow call out box, so a few of my slides. And this highlights a new policy that is introduced in 2023 for those of you that have been around the block, just to make sure that you guys are familiar with the minor changes that we've made this cycle. All right, so let's dig in. All right, here's an overview of our grant application timeline. This has not changed from last year to this year, but I do want to specifically note 3 dates or deadlines identified here. The first is long gone, long past. That's May 1st. We encourage all applicants to confirm their eligibility to apply. And we'll talk about what eligibility means in just a little while. But we encourage them to apply for eligibility by May 1st. And if you haven't done that, don't worry, it's a soft deadline. It just enables us to ensure that you are eligible. And if there's any things that need to be tweaked in your bylaws or any changes that need to be made or fees that need to be paid to DFI, you get all that out of the way in plenty of time to meet the deadline. The second deadline to note here in this timeline is the September 15th pre-proposal deadline or pre-application deadline. This is the same as last year, and I'm going to walk you through what a pre-proposal or pre-application looks like and how to submit one. And then the third deadline is November 15th, and this is our grant application, the final grant application deadline. You'll note in the blue call out box above that while these are our deadlines, I really strongly encourage you to create your own timeline with any additional milestones or deadlines necessary to solicit partner buy-in or board approval. There will be intermediary steps here within this grant application process, and you will want to set your own timeline to ensure that you yourselves are staying on course in order to meet our deadlines. All right, so next we're going to move to kind of the post-application deadline timeline. Post-application deadline timeline, that's a horrible side title. This is the timeline that you will embark on if you should receive an award. Basically what happens is we receive our applications November 15th, and our staff works diligently from November 15th to February 1st, ranking and reviewing and ranking grant applications. And we aim to publish a proposed funding list in early February of each year. So by then you will have a good idea of whether or not you were selected to be funded. And then between February 1st and March 15th, our staff works to condition your grant accordingly and get the grant agreement out to you and in hand, ideally by March 15th, which is the grant start date. If you're to receive a grant, no costs can be incurred prior to this March 15th start date. That is when the project can officially kick off. And then typically our grants run from anywhere from 1 to 3 years in duration, depending on the nature of the project or the sub-program under which you were awarded. All right. And then there's one other timeline that we should discuss that you should be aware of prior to applying for a surface water grant, and that is our payment and reimbursement schedule. So once you are awarded and the grant agreement is in hand, you will have the option to receive an advance payment. For education and planning grants, you have the option of receiving up to 75% of your grant award in advance payment. And then we will reserve the remaining 25% of your grant award until after you've incurred all your costs and your final project deliverables have been submitted. For management grants, it's a little bit different. The vast majority of our management grants, you receive a 25% advance payment, up to $25,000 maximum. And then you are eligible to request a partial payment once per year for up to 4 years or to 4 times. I just want to emphasize again, Jen mentioned this earlier, but this is a reimbursement program. So you must incur all your costs. You must write all the checks, pay all your invoices prior to seeking reimbursement from the state. So you need that financial capacity to get the work done before you request reimbursement. All right, now that you're familiar with our grant cycle timeline, let's discuss the actual process of applying for a grant and what that looks like. Project development and soliciting funding can be a pretty long and winding road. We're going to break the grant application process into 4 steps for the purposes of today's discussion. We're going to talk about eligibility, the eligibility of your organization, the eligibility of your water body, and the eligibility of activities. Are the activities that you're proposing within your project eligible to receive state funding? Next, we're going to talk about gathering all necessary stakeholders. You will need to garner support internally and externally to your organization as you scope your project and before you submit an application. So you want to bear in mind that strong partnerships and local support can help your project not only succeed on the ground, but also score well in a competitive grant category. So this is a step not to overlook. The third thing we'll talk about is drafting your pre-application. So when we actually start to put pen to paper and begin to sketch out your project, how does that process unfold? And I will actually walk you through the application and what segments of the application you need to complete for the pre-application step. And last but not least, we'll talk about finalizing and submitting your application. And in this section of the presentation, I will give you quite a bit of insight as to how we review and rank our grants, how our ranking committee score grants, and a few tips for success. All right, so let's talk about eligibility. Hopefully most of you on this call, if you're intending to apply this September or November, have already confirmed your organization's eligibility. But if you haven't, like I said, that's okay. There may still be time. We just want to move ahead as quickly as possible with this process. So there are a large variety of entities that are eligible to receive surface water grants. Some are automatically eligible, such as counties, municipalities, local units of government, tribal governing bodies, and lake districts. They do not have to apply for eligibility. Others do have to apply, and this includes lake associations, river organizations, nonprofit organizations, producer-led groups, and school districts. Individuals are not eligible to receive grants unless they are applying for funds to control an NR 40 prohibited species found on their property. So I just want to emphasize that the individuals are not typically eligible. And if there is work to be done on a private property, they must collaborate with an eligible organization, such as a lake district or a lake association or a producer-led group, etc. All right. You might have noticed in the call out box in this slide that producer-led groups are eligible to apply for surface water grants. And this is a new development as a result of a bill that was recently passed and signed by Governor Evers. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to go ahead and try to open this form. Hopefully this works and you see it on the screen. Let's see. It's loading. It's almost as if it's by design that I'm having trouble opening this form.
And Jennifer put a link to the form in the chat as well. Most people should be able to actually click on the link in the chat and
Here it is.
Open up as well.
Okay, thanks, Eric, so much. Yes, I just want to take this opportunity to highlight that we have made changes to this eligibility application as a result of the bill previously mentioned. And if you'll see on the back of this, on the third page of this application, there are a list of qualifications per organization type that is eligible to apply. And down at the bottom here, I've added a qualified producer-led group. So those of you that are interested representing a producer-led group today or interested in working with a producer-led group, these qualifications are available on this form to review. An important thing to note is a qualified producer-led group must be incorporated in the state of Wisconsin. So if you're not incorporated, you are more than welcome to a collaborator, your collaborator that you're working with, whether it be the County Land Conservation District, Extension, etc. They may apply on your behalf. So please note this fourth bullet here within qualifications. So, and I'm happy to take any questions about qualified producer-led groups at the end of the presentation today. I know that there were several of you who did have questions specific to this new class of eligibility, if you will. All right, getting back to the slide here, let's see. All right, hopefully you can see my PowerPoint. Eric, is that slide back up?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for the confirmation. So regardless what type of organization you are, from that list of organizations on the back of the application, you do have to apply every 10 years. Or if you amend your bylaws or anything significant changes, you should let us know. So if you're an organization that has received a surface water grant in the past, but you have not touched base with the environmental grant specialist about the review of your eligibility, it's worth reaching out to them just to make sure that you're on the up and up before you submit an application. And then last but not least, you must be in good standing with the Department of Financial Institutions, or DFI. So if you look on the DFI website, make sure that you're in good standing, because if you are not, we unfortunately cannot disperse state funds to you. All right. So that kind of covers the issue of whether or not your organization is eligible, but what about your water body? In general, activities funded through the Surface Water Grant Program can be categorized into two types of services: protection and enhancement. Protection services are those services like planning, implementing activities in the watershed that protect the water body's water quality, things like that. Resource enhancement services are funding our activities that increase the recreational or environmental values of a waterway. So this may be like the control of aquatic invasive species. It could be an alum treatment. It could be things of these nature, things that typically happen in the water body itself, habitat improvements, things of that nature. So we cannot fund enhancement services on water bodies that do not meet the minimum boating access standards per NR 1.91. We are prohibited from funding those types of activities on these water bodies. So it's really important to know before you apply whether or not your water body meets these access standards, especially if you're going to be applying for these enhancement services. That being said, those water bodies that don't meet the minimum boating access standards, they can apply for protection funds like planning, but they are they don't compete very well. They are penalized during the ranking because priority is given to those water bodies that the public has access to. So be familiar with your boating access standards per NR 191 on the water body for which your project is going to benefit. All right, so that covers the eligibility of your organization, the eligibility of your water body. Last but not least are the activities and the costs to be incurred eligible. This is kind of the most important way to do this is to ensure that you are soliciting funding under the most appropriate grant subprogram. So make sure you refer to guidance and you make sure that the project activities that you are proposing is well aligned with the subprogram for which you are seeking funding from. There's also within guidance lists of eligible and ineligible costs, and these are going to vary based upon those subprograms. And we'll talk a little bit more about this at a future slide. So that's kind of your three tiers of eligibility. All right, we're going to transition now to step 2 of applying for a surface water grant, and that is gathering all stakeholders. It's always a good idea to reach out and identify local entities that are aligned with your purpose in your own watershed or in your own area. When surface water management challenges are large and complex, which almost inevitably they are, the more relationships you have, quite often the better your ability to meet these challenges. In fact, when projects are collaborative or when they serve a larger purpose or work to achieve the goals of multiple organizations, they often score higher within our program. So here's a list of common partners that work broadly, on these issues. But I encourage you to look locally. It's not only important to garner support for your projects, you also want to be cognizant of how your projects fit into kind of the temporal, physical, and institutional landscape. For example, are you complementing past and current initiatives in your watershed? Where do you and your objectives fit into the whole puzzle? I also want to, sorry about that. I also want to note that it's super important that not only do you have strong external support, but you also need internal support as well. So make sure that you have clear and frequent communication with your internal stakeholders, whether that is members of your organization or even your board. Especially since our grantees rely heavily on local volunteer hours and match. You want to make sure that you have everybody at the table. And speaking of internal support, you will be required to submit an authorizing resolution with your application in November. However, it's highly recommended that you go ahead and draft an authorizing resolution, have it approved by your governing body as soon as possible within the project development. An authorizing resolution has to attest to the financial capacity of your organization. It has to state that the applicant, that you will follow all state and local regulations. And it has to indicate that which officers or employees of the organization are authorized to complete certain tasks related to applying for and managing the grant. We encourage you to identify positions rather than individuals, as there can be turnover in your board during the life of a project. I bring this up now early on in the application process because there are some entities such as counties where this process may take a little bit longer than normal. For your convenience, we have provided a fillable grant project resolution form 8700-388, which is available on our grants webpage under the Applying tab. You may use this form. Most like associations and like districts do. Alternatively, you can use something similar. Most cases, counties, for instance, will use their own resolution format, etc., or even a budget bill sometimes. But make sure that it contains the information that is required, that is noted on our fillable form. And if you don't use the form, I really highly encourage you to send a draft of the resolution to your environmental grant specialist for review prior to taking it to your board for approval. And then the last thing I'll say about authorizing resolutions is that the resolution itself has to be signed by somebody other than the person it is authorizing to represent the organization. It basically has to be a third party, either a secretary or somebody from the board typically signs these resolutions. All right. The next step in the application process is actually scoping your project, preparing to submit a pre-application by the September 15th deadline. The pre-application process is really meant for you to get your thoughts on paper, do the best you can in order to help communicate your ideas for a project. And this allows our staff, once we receive these, to provide technical assistance and feedbacks on project priorities and eligibility before you submit the final app. Because once that final app comes in the door, it's too late. We don't have the flexibility or the authority to make significant changes to an application after we receive the final app. So this pre-application, doing the best you can and capturing what it is you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it to the best of your ability is really to your benefit to make sure that everything is on the up and up. It really connects you to that local assistance, to your biologist, to the environmental grant specialist. It's really important to note that we know that things are going to change, though. Ideally, they will change. Hopefully, they'll get better throughout this process. And so the pre-app and final application are completely independent of one another. The quality of your pre-app is not going to affect the final funding decision. So, so keep that in mind as we move forward. Okay, so what is required within a pre-application? I'm going to go ahead in just a second and open up our application. And in our application, it notes which sections are required in the pre-application requirements. So I'm going to walk you through section 1, section 2A, 2B, 5, and 8. Let's see here. All right, so you should see our homepage right now, our Surface Water Grants homepage. And underneath the Applying tab, if you scroll down past our grant cycle timeline, you will see the Surface Water Grant application form. And I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And apparently this takes a while when I'm in Zoom or something. All right. So here's the grant application. First and foremost, you want to make sure you're using the most recent version. So I would encourage you always to go to the website and grab the application. If you submit a 2022 application, we will have to unfortunately send it back to you and have you fill it out again. So just make sure you're always using the most recent version. And right here, we identify the sections that must be submitted in a pre-application. So, and as well as a few other important announcements. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to the first page of the application. And again, here in red on the right-hand side of the application, you will see the sections that are required for a pre-application are noted pre-application. This is a reactive form. So right now, if I was to scroll down through the form, I would not see all of the questions required of me at this point. There is no section 8, for example. It is a reactive form, and you must fill out sections 1 and 2 before you proceed with the rest of the form. Section 1 is the ecosystem type, and this in large part will determine what flavor of funding you're receiving or you're asking for. You're asking for lakes, rivers, or AIS. So I'm going to put lakes for now, and I'm going to go ahead and hit surface water planning. And these are all the application types, the subcategories that Jen walked us through earlier. Then once you've selected these two, you can scroll through the application and be confident that the rest of the application is visible. The budget is required for pre-application. Again, not necessary that you have this completely fleshed out by the time you submit a pre-app in September 15th, but we encourage you to capture all the general expenses you may expect to incur with the project. And then section 8 is your narrative section. And again, this is listed as a pre-application section, and we would love as much information as you can provide us at the time in September 15th, so that we primarily can ensure that your project is properly aligned with the subcategory for which you're soliciting funds for. It's also, you're going to receive feedback, or you may receive feedback from your biologist on how to maybe what they would like to see happen on the ground, or what they feel may be more competitive under the category. So the more information you can provide us, the better. All right, let's go ahead and jump back to our presentation. Okay, I'm going to make you dizzy. Everybody close their eyes. All right, so that's kind of what is required of the pre-application. Next, I'm going to talk about finalizing your application and submitting an application. Once you submit a pre-application on September 15th, Central Office staff, Jen, myself, and Sarah will intake that and disperse that to the biologists that you've either noted on your application that you've been working with, or the biologist who we deem is most appropriate based upon the scope and the location of your project. And that local biologist then may request a meeting from you to discuss that application further. Or on the contrary, you can request a meeting with your biologist as well. The EGS will also receive the application, the pre-application, and they'll begin to review it for eligibility. And you may also request a meeting with your EGS if you have questions. So I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about what makes a strong application. And in this process, I'm going to give you a little peek behind the curtain of how we review and rank our grants, and what we have seen, what we see in a good application, and what we see in a poor application. But first of all, I'm going to talk about how grant ranking works. Okay. So once your application comes in, the final application comes in the door, we screen that application for eligibility. And then after that happens, once their project has been deemed eligible, we assign it to anonymous reviewers who use ranking criteria from the applicant guide to score each project. Our ranking criteria is spelled out in the guidance document. Appendix A contains all the application ranking sheets by subprogram. These are the actual ranking sheets that we use, so there's no surprises there. These ranking sheets give you a very strong idea of what it is we're looking for in a project. And I'd encourage you to take a look at these early in the drafting process. And again, when you're finished, I'd encourage you to rank yourself. A couple of things to keep in mind: our rankers are technical experts, but they have no knowledge of your project. So your local biologist that you've been working with throughout the project development process will not be scoring your application. Thus, it's really important that you write to an unfamiliar audience. Again, they're technical experts, but you still want to provide them justification for why you're proposing to do what you're proposing to do, and provide them with adequate background to help justify your approach. Another really important thing to note is that rankers only review required documents. So if you submit supplemental materials like PI survey results or other various attachments that were not solicited within the grant application, they will not be reviewing those documents. Those documents actually during intake get shaved off the application and put in a separate folder called supplemental, and those reviewers don't see it. So you have to be concise, you have to be consistent within that Section 8 narrative, or within the application attachments solicited within the application itself. I do want to point out that we have revised several of our ranking sheets this cycle. The education grants, county lake grants, AIS supplemental prevention grants, and the management plan implementation restoration grants were all revised to some extent. So please make sure you're looking at the most recent version of our guidance document, and don't assume that you know what's in there, because it has changed. All right. So walking away from our final ranking meeting this past January, there were definitely reoccurring comments made by our rankers in regards to the funded projects. And these are not atypical. This is what we hear year after year about our strong applications, our strong projects. They tend to have clearly articulated a need. They have strong justification. They have lots of external support. Their applications are specific. They have a detailed plan of action. So they know what they're going to do before they do it. There's a lot of complementary management going on in the watershed that they've noted. They've noted how they fit into the bigger puzzle within the watershed. They have a good monitoring plan to be able to assess the success of their efforts. And to be able to adapt in the future if they need to change their approaches. And last but not least, they have broad-ranging management approaches. So they have, like, for instance, an integrated plant management approach as opposed to a single-pronged approach. Alternatively, on the other hand, probably the single most common comment made for those that scored low is that the proposal lacked detail. It just wasn't fully fleshed out. They probably did not start the planning process soon enough, or they assumed knowledge of the reviewers. Brevity either tells us that that they don't know, they don't have a plan, or that they think that we can understand where they're coming from without providing us the adequate backstory. Other comments we hear, a lack of external support, kind of a lone wolf working on the landscape. They did not provide scientific rationale. So they may assume, again, that our technical experts know why they want to do what they want to do without providing us with rationale. They're unclear why they need the data. Again, kind of related. They don't have a strong justification for doing what they're doing. They don't have a monitoring plan, and they don't really have complementary management taking place on the landscape. So in general, high-scoring applications propose impactful projects that are well aligned with the priorities within the specific program. So the priorities identified in that ranking sheet. They are detailed and specific, they're concise and well written, they're aligned with funding priorities, and they are written for an unfamiliar audience. All right, so let's talk about the budget. We've spent a lot of time talking about the narrative. Let's talk about the budget. Once you've kind of determined what the necessary costs are going to be to meet the goals and objectives of the project, and you've written that narrative, it's time to finalize a budget. And while I realize I'm just now mentioning this within that final application portion of the presentation, it's really highly advised that you consult with your EGS during the pre-application phase of the project to avoid any unpleasant surprises on the back end. Prior to award, basically, once that final application comes in, prior to a grant award, we will unfortunately have to strike any or redline any ineligible expenses or activities within a project budget, which will ultimately reduce the award amount. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a few important things to keep in mind while developing your budget to hopefully avoid such things. I will be referring to section 6 within guidance quite a bit. This is only 8 pages long and super important resource when developing your budget. So I really encourage you to take a look at that. All right, so we're going to talk about developing a budget 101, eligible costs, cost containment, professional service providers, and long-term financial plans. So developing a budget 101, don't save it for last. It can be quite tempting to do this at the last minute, but crafting an accurate budget takes time. And it's really important because once your final application comes in, and if it is to be awarded, if you are to receive a grant award, that budget in your application becomes the project budget. If there's a cost incurred that wasn't in that original budget, it will not be eligible for reimbursement. So it's really important that you capture all your eligible costs, and it's important that you use accurate figures to avoid overestimating or underestimating costs. And then be specific. The more specific you can be in your budget, the more likely our EGSs are going to detect ineligible expenses in advance so that there's, again, no surprises. All right. So what are eligible costs and activities? Well, it's complicated. They do differ between the sub-programs. So section 3 within guidance is going to outline what activities are eligible by sub-program. And section 6 is going to list specific eligible and ineligible expenses. So it's really important that you refer to both of these sections while developing your budget. I should say that ineligible activities cannot be in a budget at all, not even as match. So just be wary of that as you're identifying potential sources of match, which we're going to talk about in just a second. All right. Another thing in regards to eligible costs to keep in mind is that there are limits to how much you may spend on certain costs. For example, in a planning grant, no more than 20% of a planning grant may be spent on education activities. And any grants, direct administration costs, both cash and in kind, are limited to 10% and held at the end of the final reimbursement. So, and then we define administrative costs within our guidance as well. And then the last thing to think about when we're talking about eligible costs, or last 2 things to think about when we're talking about eligible costs, is proportional share of costs and depreciation of capital assets. So if you are, for instance, putting together an education grant proposal, and you would like to include the cost of developing or updating a website specific to the project, or developing a portion of your website to be specific to this project or effort, we will only fund for the proportional share of costs of your web development, of your host, whatever it is, your developer, that is proportional to that project. So for instance, if you have 5 web pages and one of them focuses on your aquatic invasive species education effort, we'll only pay for 1/5 of any costs associated with your web development. And another example would be like a newsletter, publishing and distributing a newsletter. If only 1 page of 5 was dedicated to the project, we would pay for 20%, or 20% of those costs would be eligible under the grant. So that's proportional share of eligible costs. The next is depreciation of capital assets, which is kind of related. If you have a if you have a piece of equipment, for example, that is greater than $5,000 in value, we are going to depreciate that piece of equipment. And how we do that is we take the total value or expense related to that equipment and divide it by the useful life. And if you don't know the useful life of a piece of equipment, our environmental grant specialist can help you. And then we multiply that by the number of years that the grant is open. So we will only pay a proportion of, if you will, of that capital asset, as kind of described here. So again, both of these are both of these policies, if you will, are in guidance if you have further questions, or this is exactly what your environmental grant specialist is there to help you with. All right, we're running out of time, but I'll keep going. So grantee and local match, it's also important when you're developing your budget to keep in mind that we have a local match requirement. For education and planning grants, there's a minimum grantee match requirement of 33%. And for management, it's 25%. Eligible costs paid with funds generated by local entities, non-DNR state or federal agencies, foundations, businesses, private individuals, etc., can be used as match. Also donated eligible costs, such as donated equipment, volunteer labor, supplies, or construction materials, even donated professional labor, can be used as match as well. I do want to note that one change this year is that we did increase our donated volunteer labor rates from $12 an hour to $15 an hour. I think this was the first time in 10 years, roughly, that we were able to get an increase through for this. So I'm excited to share that with you. I know that it's modest, or many of you see it as modest, but it is progress. All right, let's talk about cost containment. Once you've drafted your budget, you must ensure that you're taking the necessary measures to ensure that you are containing your costs. We are a taxpayer dollar generate, we are spending taxpayer dollars generated through the motorboat gas tax. And it is our duty, it is both the duty of our agency and you as the grantee or the steward of these state dollars to ensure that these taxpayer dollars are being spent responsibly. So if you are spending over $2,500 on a particular cost, you must implement one of the cost containments seen here on the slide. I don't have time today to go into the details or specifics related to each of these measures. However, this is in guidance. And I encourage you to kind of identify which cost containment approach you wish to take early during the pre-application phase and reach out to your environmental grant specialist to make sure that you're on track and that you're following the requirement. And then let's talk about professional service agreements. Again, if you are spending more than $5,000 of grant funding and you're going to be hiring a subcontractor or an agent to undertake a portion of your project requiring more than that $5,000, you have to enter into a professional service agreement. The benefit of these PSAs is to give you, the grantee, recourse in the event that the consultant does substandard work or incomplete work. This ensures that when you come in after you've paid that consultant or subcontractor for their work, and you come in to solicit reimbursement from the state, it ensures that you will be eligible for that reimbursement if the consultant or contractor followed the PSA. We do have a form that's available to you online to utilize, or you may use your own substantially similar document. And so again, this is something that your environmental grant specialist can help you walk through. Finally, let's talk about long-term financial plans. This is a new requirement in 2023. Multi-phase implementation projects that will require funding beyond the scope of the current proposal to meet the objectives, meaning you're going to do year 1 and 2 under this grant, but you have to do 2 more treatments or make 2 more, do 2 more activities in order to benefit from any of it. Then you need to provide to us proof that your organization has a financial capacity to complete those subsequent phases of the project. if you don't get additional surface water grant funding in the future. This protects our investment in a project. A strong example of this is if you have been prescribed 4 years of alum treatment, and you're coming in for a grant for 1 year of treatment. You have to demonstrate to us that if you don't get another surface water grant in the future, you have the ways and means to complete the additional 3 treatments. Otherwise, that first treatment, the funding that we invested in the first treatment may be for naught. So again, your environmental grant specialist can help you with that. All right, so that is developing a budget. I know I flew through some of those points relatively quickly, but I just want to make you aware of these requirements now, so that you may read up on them and be familiar with them when it does come time for you to submit your final application on November 15th. The email is by far the preferred method of submittal to the DNR Surface Water Grants inbox. And you don't have to wait until November 15th to submit it. I would say 90% of our applications come in either the night of the 14th or on November 15th. And bear in mind that there are 3 humans sitting on the other side managing that inbox. So it does take us quite a while to get through those hundreds of applications that are coming in the door in 24 to 48 hours. I do encourage you to submit maybe on the 12th or the 13th. That'll give us time to respond to you, to let you know that we did indeed receive the application and that you are good to go. Otherwise, yeah, you might not hear from us until the 16th or 17th, and I know that can be quite stressful. All right. And then I'll just end with showing you some of our resources, and then hopefully those of you that have time can stick around to ask a few questions. We've already talked about our Surface Water Grant webpage and the link to our applicant guide. And second to that guide, your second most important resources are our staff, our regional staff. And each project or application is assigned to a biologist, either a rivers biologist, AIS biologist, or a local lakes biologist, depending on the scope of the project. If you go to the bottom of our Surface Water Grant webpage, you'll find a link to these maps and their contact information. So these biologists will be your technical resources on our project. They can answer questions about scoping, about your technique or project specifics, and design. The second individual that'll be assigned to your grant is your environmental grant specialist. And this is my team of EGSs from around the state, Jill, Gina, and Chrissy. Your environmental grant specialist can help you with the financial side of the program, help you understand and navigate our application requirements and our forms, as well as the reimbursement process if you have questions about that. Our forms, we've mentioned forms quite a bit today. Make sure that you're using the most current version of the form. And I know that many of you on this call have probably had troubles opening our forms in the past. This, unfortunately, we haven't made much progress in this arena this year. I encourage you all to right-click on a link to any form on our website and save it on your desktop or your laptop computer. That way you can then navigate to that location and open it with Adobe Reader. The problem is a lot of internet browsers today cannot open our PDF forms. They don't work well together. They don't play nicely. So if you can get the form on your desktop or on your local machine and then open it with Adobe Reader, you'll be good to go. And then last but not least, just another reminder, most forms are reactive. And so they must be completed from the beginning to the end in order to make sure that you're answering all of the questions required. So we've thrown a lot of information at you today. I just want to say, if you're new to the program and your head is spinning, you're not sure where to start, I encourage you to look at our 2 kind of streamlined sub-programs, Healthy Lakes and Rivers and Clean Boats, Clean Waters. These 2 grant programs are a great kind of entry-level programs that help you embark on kind of bite-sized projects that engage shoreline owners and other volunteers in the protection and stewardship of a water body. And my last piece of advice for you is to sign up to receive the Surface Water Grants Gov Delivery e-news. You can point your cell phone at that QR code on your screen right now and enter your email and sign up today. We will notify you of important updates, additional educational opportunities, and deadlines moving forward. All right, I know that we are 5 minutes over already, and I have not been looking at our participant list to see if people have been dropping off, but I'm more than happy to stick around to answer questions because I'm sure you have some.
Yeah, and so you can ask questions either by typing them in the chat, or if you're looking at your Zoom, there should be something that has a little smiley face and says reactions. You can raise a hand there. If you raise your hand, it'll look like this up here, and then you can get called upon. I think there were some questions about environmental grant specialists and what those were about, but I think we got some of that answered. How to find your biologist. There was one question about access and how access is measured. It says there's lots of public access, but it's not boating related. Laura, can you give a little insight into how like boating parking places and things like that are come into play when grants are being ranked?
Yeah, and unfortunately in our 1.91, only the table in our 1.91 only takes into account the boating, the boat and trailer access for lakes. It doesn't take into account additional like carry-in launches or parks, etc. Now, if you have questions about whether or not your water body meets the standards within that table, reach out to your biologist. There's a small caveat within our 1.91 that allows lakes that don't necessarily have the adequate number of trailer parking spots, but meet local demand. And it's really up to your local rec warden, the fisheries biologist, and the lakes biologist to determine whether or not that may or may not be the case. So that's a really gray area, but please, if you have questions, reach out and ask them. It's important to do. So I will tell you, I will give you a clue that if fisheries has deemed that your lake lacks adequate access for the purposes of providing enhancement services, in this case, fish stocking, then you probably are not eligible to receive enhancement funding through our program. So,
thanks, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
And it is worth, Laura mentions a table in our 1.91, and it is a table by area of lake and by river. So it's worth probably taking a look at too.
And rivers are interesting because they're kind of their own category. If you look at our ranking criteria in Appendix A, it'll ask, does this water body meet the minimum standards in our 1.91, or is it a river project? Most rivers meet public access, kind of defined in a different way. So again, reach out if you have questions.
And someone did have a question about the recording. Again, we'll process the Zoom recording, upload it to YouTube, where it can be, I think, more easily found and viewed. And then we'll share that out through the Wisconsin DNR to the folks who registered for today. And then it'll also be shared in a couple of different ways over the next couple of days or weeks, just to make sure people are alert to the resource. Just this recording is really just one of the pieces of resources available to help people navigate the grant program.
Laura, for the last question about what do we mean by biologist, do you want to scroll up a couple slides on your presentation? So when we say biologist, we are loosely referring to either a streams biologist, aquatic invasive species biologist, or lakes biologist. And so depending on what grant category you're you think you're going to operate in lakes, rivers, or AIS, these are the folks spread across the state, and that will be able to help you. And I put the link in the chat, but it is, if you just go, type in Google DNR surface water grants, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page, that comes up, there'll be a PDF you can open that has contact information in it. I know someone put that they reached out and they haven't heard back. Keep in touch with them, noting it is field season. A lot of these folks are out in the field, out in rivers and lakes a lot this time of the year, getting a lot of field work done. So I know many of them may have a little bit delayed response just due to the fact that it's hard for them to kind of both manage that field obligation and email all the time during this time of the year.
Any other questions? Not seeing any raised hands, and it is now coming up on 4:15. So I guess I just want to thank Laura and Jen for joining us today and sharing the presentation. Like I said, we'll record this. I'm going to hit stop